I think I don't need to present myself again because I did it before. What we are going to talk about is about how support for Google Calendar and contacts were actually implemented for KDE PIM. I think this presentation is going to be somewhat more advanced than the previous one. I was even joking that my screenshots now are screenshots of Wireshark network packet analyzer. So, okay. All right. I always like to start by asking why. What are your motivations? Why you are actually willing to do something? Well, especially Google and KDE, it's quite easy to answer that. It's just beautiful. In case you guys don't know this girl, she's a Brazilian. Her name is Gisele Bündchen. She's the most beautiful and sexy girl in the whole world. But besides that, KDE and Google has great documentation. It also works as a good proof of concept of synchronization with remote servers. I'm quite glad to know that it worked for our friend, the whole idea, the concept. And especially for KDE, it's the KDE community that really attracted me. So what is community? I don't know, there are several different definitions to that. But personally, I think maybe the one that comes closer to what KDE is about agreement as to goals. I think everyone that's both contributing to KDE and also a KDE user has a common set of goals, like having a better desktop, helping to improve the software ecosystem, and so on. But when you are working together with a community, you got to be ready to admit your mistakes. This is an IRC log where I was talking with Crack. Crack is Kevin Kramer, one of the Conad developers. And he said to me that there were some things wrong on my code, and you got to play nice to actually work together with the community. And also have to be ready to answer difficult questions. When I was talking with the developer of K-Wallet, he asked me, will your research sit my Google Calendar? And I answered, yeah, well, it's for Google Contacts right now, and so on. Okay, but my personal definition of a good community is where it's easy for both new coders as also designers and users to actually contribute. Okay, so this is a video. It's showing Google Contacts and KDE Address Book working together. A new contact is going to be created. I think it was even featured in .kde, I'm not sure. So I really love Wallace agreement. So yeah, it created a contact. What is really interesting is that thanks to Conad being completely asynchronous, the user feeling is that the activity of creating a contact in a remote server is like something that happens exactly on the same stand, but it's not the reality. Reality is that UI has a process, a Conad server has another process, and finally, each research runs on its own process in its own address space. Here on the browser, we are going to see that the Gromit and Wallace contacts were added to this Google account. Including support for photos. Okay, so you can actually add, edit, and delete contacts using a Conad plus the Google resource. Not only contacts, but also calendar events are supported. And the next video shows basically the same thing, but for calendar this time. So, but this time we are using the Conad console. We have to add the resource. You insert your user account plus the password. Hosted account are supported. The whole synchronization process works in 2 steps. You have first synchronization, that is the slow synchronization, where all the data are sent from the Google server back to your computer. And you have the fast synchronization, the fast sync, where only the changes are actually retrieved from the server. And there we have it. Okay, so let's talk about this thing. The Conad resource was officially released together with KDE 4.3, as also the Google data resource. It was featured in KDE Planet and Commits Digest. I was really happy when I saw this post by Kevin Kramer, Brazilian overlords. You know, definitely gives an ego boost. What is the size of this work? It took me 700 commits on, if you count the library, the C library that implements Google Data Protocol, together with the Conad resource. It took me 700 commits and around 7,000 lines of code, only the code but not the comments and the unit tests and so on. Okay, talking about lines of code is an old metric, because we know that code reuse will generate a smaller sized project, but just to have an idea of the size. And when I was about to release it, I discovered something really funny. There is the KDE bug tracker, where there is a list for feature requests. And I discovered that support for calendar synchronization, Google Calendar synchronization, was the top 10. Actually, it was in the 10th position. But if you consider also CalDAV support, and all the users wanted CalDAV because they also want to use Google Calendar, and we add both, it's almost twice as much votes than the second one. So this was like the top most wanted feature on KDE. So, okay, I think if you are, for example, contributing to a open source free software project, it's always a good idea to left the door open for newcomers. If, for example, when I addressed a Conad IRC channel for the first time and people were not willing to help me, probably I would not write the resource. Okay, let's talk about Google. Google is all the hype. We are in California. Oh, Google is so cool. How Google Data Protocol works is a REST API. Data is supplied in Atom format with just an XML. So basically you do HTTP requests and retrieve XML, send XML, and that is it. It allows to get all your data, edit it, delete it, do some limited types of queries and other operations. But synchronization can be tricky, and this is why I'm going to explain. So basically how the protocol works. I have to do an HTTPS post to a specific URL together with the client login and password. We are going to have as a result a string where you have the SID, the LSID, and the authentication token. And this is the authentication token that is used to do the later requests. So, oh, I promise, we are going to see some Wireshark porn. What we have is a HTTP post operation towards a URL, which is google.com calendar/feed/default/private. We have to inform the size of the data that we are actually posting to the server. We have to add the authentication token retrieved with the previous request. And how we do edit operations? Basically the same thing, but this time we do not a post, but we do a put operation. And we are going to use a new URL here on the put, where this URL, it's unique, and it's a property of each contact or of each calendar event. And delete is an HTTP delete command, again using the edit URL. So it's a quite simple protocol. I don't know why, but Google never provided a C or a C++ implementation of it. So who implements Google Data Protocol? Well, it's libgcal. The dependencies are libxml, libcure. It has a BSD license. The features you have add, edit, delete, carry by updated, carry by custom strings, support for hosted accounts, how XML operation mode, and all those whistles and bells. And its origin was OpenSync Python plugin started by Eduardo Rabicoste. He's a Brazilian hacker. Nowadays, he's doing more kernel-related stuff. And I used to work together with him. Anyone knows what is OpenSync? Yeah. Well, OpenSync, the original purpose is to be like a general synchronization framework. It holds some promise, but the fact is that the project right now, it's not being actively developed. I'm trying to be nice. Okay, this is a video I did 1 year and a half ago, where I have a cell phone, a Nokia N95. I have a Google Calendar, Google Contact account, and I wrote the Google Data plugin for OpenSync. And at that time, I was using the SyncML plugin of OpenSync to extract the data from the cell phone using Bluetooth and SyncML as the communication protocol. So yeah, it was extremely difficult trying to press the cell phone, trying to operate the web browser, and at the same time making the video. So this is why it's shaking like crazy. But what's going to show is that we have now on the cell phone the very same contacts that we have on the Google account. And if the web browser refreshes, so we have, previously we had 3 contacts. Well, it takes quite a lot of time. And now we have the same contacts on the Google account. So basically, 1 year and a half ago, I think Google released support for contact synchronization, I think 6 to 8 months ago for Nokia cell phones. But I got it working like 1 year and a half ago. Okay, let's talk about development, software development techniques. Anyone here knows what is test-driven development? TDD? Okay. libgcal was designed from the scratch using TDD. So what is the basic idea? Normally the workflow of the developer is I write the code and I write a simple test for it. If it works, I throw out the test and I will try to integrate this code to something else. On TDD, the workflow is exactly the opposite. We start by first writing the test. Even if you don't have any code at all, you implement some stub functions that should return an error. So basically your tests will be failing until you implement the functionality inside of the function. So this is the output of unit tests running on libgcall. And this is the test coverage report. What is really interesting is that when you have a unit tests to stress your code, you can actually generate reports of testing coverage, where you can inspect all the modules of your code, see the coverage rate. And at that time, libgcall had 85% of real code instrumentation and 100% of public functions tested. And you can also later inspect which parts of the code are being actually executed, how many times the code are actually being executed, and so on. In August 2008, libgcall was featured in an official Google blog because it was like the first C and C++ implementation of Google Data Protocol. So let's talk about KDE plus PIM. You guys already have seen at least 2 talks about Conad, so maybe I'm not going to dive further here. But the basic idea is that, we need to update this. I think IMAP resources finally working, isn't it? Yeah. What about the SyncML resource? What's the status of it?
There was a Summer of Code project.
Yeah.
We got it to work, TM,
but not using Bluetooth.
Haven't tried it. Can't say much for that.
Okay, well, whatever. But the idea is that a Conad server has support for different data sources. This support is provided using resource. So pretty much you can plug a Conad to whatever you can imagine. What are the Conad good features, on my personal opinion? It has dbus. Dbus is just sexy. It has a LGPL license, which also might be interesting depending on the context where you are actually working. It's completely asynchronous, which is really interesting in the sense that you can even have a resource that is blocking by nature. For example, the Google resource is blocking because when I do a request, I got to wait the request to return the data. But the UI will still continue responsive. And the Conad resource will continue working because it has a really interesting architecture. It is based on Qt, so pretty much as long as you have Qt and not the dependencies, you should be able to run Conad. But on my personal opinion, it has a limitation, that is the dependency of MySQL, but I'm pretty happy to know that people are working on that direction. Okay, so how difficult it was to write the resource? It took me 3 weeks to write the Google Contacts resource because I had never done any Conad development before. But after I got to start the Google Calendar resource, I did it in 3 days. I don't consider myself a brilliant programmer. I'm more hardworking than anything else. But I think if you are actually able to write a resource in 3 days, this is a clear signal that a Conad API should be quite easy to use, I think. And what is really interesting that if you have any question or on the KDE, run Alt F2, write the class name, and then you are going to be directed to a pretty web page with the documentation of the class. So how do you get started with KDE development? You can use a really up-to-date distribution. I would recommend OpenSUSE. Or you can run the trunk. I have been running the trunk for the last 1.5 years. Your mileage may vary, For example, I remember last year KWin was broken, so it was not possible to switch between the windows using Alt tab. But who needs to switch between the windows? Some synchronization considerations.
Just an interjection here. For KDE PIM, we've just decided that we will stick with KDE 4.4 as the basis, which means if you want to develop all the Adenilson stuff that's not trunk and very broken and needs a lot of help, all you need is a 4.4 baseline. So you can stick with 4.4 and just build KDE Linux and put it trunk.
Okay. I think probably it's going to make things easier for newcomers. Okay, let's talk about synchronization. The first bug, actually the first challenge to answer is, okay, I can be stupid and trigger slow sync every single time that the user does an operation. But that is not efficient and not smart. All programmers always love to look smart. So this decision is quite simple. I can just ask for what changed in the server. But what timestamp to use? Can we rely on the user computers, user clock to use a timestamp? No, because there are differences between time zones. You cannot be really sure about if the clock of the computer is actually working. So how to solve that? The idea is to use the timestamp of the most updated entry, being a calendar event or a contact. So if anything else changes on the server, exactly in the moment that you are doing the synchronization, you are pretty much sure that at least the timestamp on the server is going to be bigger than the timestamp of the last updated entry. Okay. And oh yeah, the devil is on details. Google Data Protocol makes possible to do some queries, but the queries are inclusive in the sense that if, for example, I use the timestamp of the most updated contact to do the query, this very same contact will be returned together with the what else has changed on the server. So I got to compare the timestamp, I got to compare the ID to make sure that I'm not going to duplicate the contacts on the list. Oh yeah, that one was pretty nasty. Added or edited entry, can't really tell. When you ask Google server for what has actually changed, it's simply not possible to know if an entry is actually a new contact or if an entry is actually an old contact that has been updated. You can only tell that, for example, an entry was deleted or if an entry was edited. Actually, this was quite funny because it triggered a bug in a Conad server. I think internally Conad has some kind of mapping table between the entries. So it was actually not able to detect that entry that I was being informed as updated was really a new entry. So I think in 2 hours working with Volker Krauser and Kevin Kramer were actually to figure out what was happening, and the code on the trunk was fixed. So once again, thanks to limitation Google Data Protocol, we actually were able to find a bug on a Conad server. Unfortunately, it was fixed. Oh yeah, now are more lightweight stories. Everyone that has ever written a hello world are pretty much aware that bugs are something that are always going to happen when you are writing any piece of code. So, oh yeah, some more white shark porn. How do we add a new entry into a Google account? Are you guys seeing this G session ID that I included into the URL of the Google server? Yeah, this bloody bastard consumed 2 weeks of work. I was almost killing myself. because what the documentation says is, if you receive the redirect, then you send the same post request again with the same authorization header and the same content, but with the digit session ID parameter appended. Appended where? On the package, on the URL, or on the body of your package? Can't tell. Got to try it by brute force. The documentation should actually say that when you receive the redirect, send the same post request with the same authorization header, plus the location specified in the response location. What is really fun is that redirection only happens with Google Calendar, but does not happen with Google Contacts. What is even more fun is that I tested libgcall in Brazil, Finland, Germany, USA, and at least for Google Calendar, there was always a redirect. But then I received a user report from a user in Japan. For whatever reason, Google server there was not answered with a redirect. So I sent to him a patch and tried to write like a workaround to deal with this. Oh yeah, this one was nasty. So do you guys maybe remember that when you do an authentication request, you receive an SID, LSID, and an authentication token? Okay, but when I try to add a new element into a Google account, I was receiving this error message, org XML as AX parse exception. It was not clear what was happening. I tried to post into Google Forum, Google Developers Forum, Google Data Protocol Developers Forum. No one had an idea of what was happening. But I have some really good friends, some really good hacker friends, and Eduardo Rabicosta actually helped. And we did a remote debug session for 1 hour, and we were able to identify that there was spurious creation return new line at the end of the authentication token. This is precisely why we were getting that error message. Those two blood bytes cost me like 3 days of work. Okay, synchronous or asynchronous requests. Yeah, I said earlier that I wrote an OpenSync plugin, but OpenSync, it kind of serializes all the operations, so you have like several add operations, then you have several edit operations, and finally you have several delete operations. But upon add, does not do that. So the user can, for example, add a new contact, delete an old contact, and then edit an older contact. And this triggered a bug on libgcall, because my unit test also had a more synchronous behavior. So it was pretty interesting. By integrating libgcall into different projects, it helped me to spot a bug on my code. And this was the fix, a one-line fix. Okay, now it's not more, I think, actually now I am going to open my heart and tell you guys things that I think is really annoying about the Google Data Protocol. The first thing, we have an XML entry here representing a Google Calendar event. Do you guys notice that there is a GED recurrence whatever field on the XML? That is actually a piece of a vcard. Vcard is a format to represent calendar events. So basically, they are mixing XML with an invalid vcard to represent recurrence.
It's actually iCal, not vcard.
What?
It's iCal, not vcard.
iCal. Oh yeah, vcard is for context. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. So I think if they decide to go to an XML route, they should also represent recurrency using XML. Because the problem is that if you throw that into a iCal parser, it's going to say that is an invalid iCal.
but I think I know why they do that. The iCal recurrences are insanely difficult. There's an unfathomable array of options there. And the iCal recurrence implementations have thousands of bug fixes. It's very, very hard to get this right. And the iCal recurrence is the only specification that has the decent coverage of this problem space. So they rightfully assume that if they start something new, they would be fixing bugs for 5 to 10 years until they get it right, because that's exactly what happens with iCal. Our recurrence implementation has, I think, 800 unit tests, and that's not even covering all of the corner cases yet. So we are actually extremely grateful for this, because it means we know that our recurrence implementation will work reasonably, because it's just an insanely difficult problem.
Yeah, but I think they should at least use a valid.
Yeah, it should be a valid snippet. I totally agree.
Yeah,
but the fact that they use the syntax is actually, I think, a good idea, because it saves us from making all the mistakes again.
If you had just 2 lines on that, you would make it a valid iCal. So I don't know why they decide to go into this route.
If it makes you feel better, the group-wise wire formats for calendar events and recurrence accepts iCal recurrence specs, but then it expands those into independent entries on the server. So it expands them out into an infinite number of entries.
Cool.
And then it adds some strange keys so that you can somehow tell which entries are related to each other. But if you want to edit it, forget it.
Yeah.
There's no way you can reconstruct that recurrence rule from the series in cap time.
Nice. Yeah. Well, whatever. Okay. Let's move on. Next rant. There is a huge dichotomy between how calendar servers, Google Calendar servers actually work, and how Google Contact Server actually works. Just to give an example, I can ask the entries to be sorted by last updated. But in Calendar, the last updated entry will be the first, and the contact, the last updated entry will be the last. There is that redirect thing, where in Calendar, generally, except for Japan, you are going to receive a redirect. In contacts, you don't receive a redirect. So I think it's quite clear to notice that probably they have like 2 different teams, each one implement a different protocol, each one implement a different server, and they don't pretty much talk with each other. Oh yeah. Easy question. Is 2.0 different of 2.1? Yes, it is. But Google server don't think that. If I do a request asking, please, I want to use the version 2.0 of the protocol. Actually, if I do a request using 2, like protocol version 2, it answers with the behavior of the Google Data Protocol 2.1. And which leads us to the next slide, personalization. I really love this word, because it's exactly the opposite of optimization. Like have a bicycle with squared wheels. So, again, white shark porn, so delicious. Let's inspect it. What I have here, I have a get operation. I receive the redirect, and I using the other URL to send the same request again. And what I get is an HTTP 410 gone. What the fuck? And the problem is here, the updated meme. I said that I use timestamps to be actually able to execute fast synchronization. From version 2.0 to version 2.1, for whatever reason, Google decided that if, for example, and what is really fun is that I discovered this bug 2 days before I was going to give a presentation at a huge Brazilian free software event. And I was running the test and then started to have this behavior. So I got to dive in to try to figure out what was wrong, write an workaround to be actually able to fix that. But the fact is that if you have a Google account, and for example, in a whole month, there are no changes on it at all, if you try to execute a fast sync, it will always answer with resource gone. But previously, it didn't do that. Why they decide to go into this road? Don't know. So what was the fix? Well, the workaround is something like that. I have to add a new dummy entry, delete this dummy entry, save the timestamp of this dummy entry, and then trigger a slow sync. There is no other way to fix that. As long as you don't have a change on the Google account, fast sync will never ever work again. You could say, for example, oh, but you should not try to use the timestamp of 1 month ago. You could, I don't know, try to use a timestamp of 10 days ago. But in this case, you run the risk of losing data. Because if, for example, this Google account is, I don't know, a company account, you are going to lose data from 20 days. And I think it's like the lesser of the devils. It's better to trigger a slow sync and being able in future to have fast sync work again instead of losing data.
If you do a slow sync, will the fast sync work? Will the fast sync start working again?
After I add and delete the dummy entry, it will work. I could, for example, use the timestamp of the dummy entry as the timestamp for the queries and do fast sync and not having to do a slow sync, but I run the risk of losing data.
You couldn't just do a slow sync and that resets the fast sync mechanism?
By adding and removing an entry.
Without adding and removing an entry, just doing a slow sync to refetch the entire...
No, that is precisely the problem. If you don't change anything on the Google account, fast sync will never work again. Just as simple. There is no other way. Yeah, it's stupid. Okay, yeah, personalization tool, the Revenge. They released it, I think, 1 or 2 months ago, a version 2.2 or 2.3 of their protocol. And look how cute, how beautiful they changed the rules. So if, for example, I have an entry and I do a slow sync, I'm going to receive the data on this format, like Google service, private, full, and ID. Okay, but what happens if I later try to do a fast sync and query only by the changes? Google answers this. It's like the same ID, the same service, plus the user data, the user login data. So basically, if you try to execute a fast sync, the return data, the return editor URL will be different than what is reported for the very same item when you do a slow sync. So basically, it's another personalization, yet another personalization when they decide to update the protocol version. So what I got to do was to write code in libg call, where basically when I know that it's a fast sync, I will have to parse the string and replace it. It's just lame. So is this the end? Well, I quite recently, I don't have quite too much time to hack into a Conadi. I know that there are several users of the Google data resource. Ideally, I think the next movement, I think that could be potentially interesting, would be to rewrite libg call, but this time using Qt. I didn't use Qt before because when I started, Qt 4.4 didn't has support for XPath queries, because this is how libgcall extracts the information from the atom feed. And trying to parse the whole thing by running through the DOM hierarchy tree is not only boring, but also is way more difficult to adapt to changes when Google decides to change the format of the data, or when they decide to change the protocol behavior. Because instead of having to rewrite just one line of an XPath expression, I have to rewrite like 30 lines of C code. So starting with Qt 4.5, libgcall could be perfectly rewritten using Qt with one huge advantage, that we could have finally a synchronous behavior, because now all the network operations, they are blocking. Thanks, because I think Q Network Manager, it's asynchronous. Say you can do a request, return immediately, and have a slot that will be called when you have the data. Okay, some special thanks. I would like to thank Kevin Kramer, one of the Conad contributors, who has been of great help to actually answer my questions about Conad and make it possible to write the research. I would like to thank Igor Trindade. At that time, when I was writing this research, he was still, actually he's still doing his undergraduate course, but at that time he was just a student. Later, we are able to bring him to start working for Nokia Technology Institute. And finally, Mike Arthur, who is a Scottish guy who contributed a CMake-based build system for libgcall, because I was using AutoTools. Some personal friends like Eduardo Rabicoste, who helped me to debug some of the nasty bugs on libgcall. I have other Brazilian friends that helped me to review the API of libgcall. So for example, if you read the research, the Conad research, it's somewhat easy to understand what is happening. But why is it easy to understand what is happening? Because libgcall itself has a really clear API. So it's clear to know where you are authenticating, when you are retrieving data, and when you are actually doing edit operations. And finally, Nokia Technology Institute for allowing me to open the code and return this code to KDE. So I think this is it. Anyone have questions?
You had the limitation in the past that you could only have one login at a time. Is that still a problem, or has that been resolved now?
Well, actually being able to support multiple accounts is just trivial. What you need to do, you can just, actually, I think it could be all done on the research level without any change on libgcall. Because what you have to do is like store more than a user and password using K-Wallet. So what, supporting more than one calendar would require changes on libgcall, because you have to use another URL to do the operations. But again, it's trivial to do. The only fact is that I don't have the time to implement it. But it's open source, maybe, I don't know, someone decides to implement it. To be honest, I really doubt so, but. Other questions? Anyone want to see some wild shark porn again? No? Okay, all right, so I think this is it. Thank you very much.